Team. Good morning, church. Good morning. We are so pleased to have with us this morning Carron Odokara. I'm particularly excited because I learned of Carron through the reading of some national information and found out she was serving on a committee nationally. And it piqued my interest, and I talked to Nikki about it. I'm like, who is this person? And so anyway, I was really excited when I found out that Carron is coming to be with us this morning, so I hope you will welcome her after service. She comes to us from the Farmington Hills Church of God, where she's an associate. She also works as an IT manager at Ford, so you're a busy lady. Little bit of history, she has a local connection. She did her bachelor's at Kettering. At that time, it was GMI, so we can claim her a little bit, although most of her time has not been spent in Flint. So she's familiar with people from Westwood Church of God at that time. So anyway, I hope you will welcome her. And Carron also, I have found out, serves on a number of serves on a number of state and local boards and committees. So we are very pleased and excited to have you with us, Carron. Come and share.
Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here. I went to school just down the road and on occasion got the opportunity to come here for unity services and things like that. So there's an aspect of coming home that I'll claim, in addition to knowing Marcia and serving on committees with her, in addition to playing softball against a couple of you, I'm sorry. But there is a familiarity that is kind of nice and something that I can enjoy. But it's an odd thing when you hear someone introduce you, you're just like, what are they going to say? What do they know about you? What do they not know about you? When you go up to introduce yourself, you normally say, my name is, and you introduce yourself that way. Or you say, I do such and such, or I have a nice boat, or whatever the case might be. Sometimes you'll say, I am. I'll say, I am an IT manager at Ford Motor Company. I am, and you can fill in the blank. I am statements declare something about yourself, and so Jesus used I am statements to help teach us just a little bit more about who he is. In particular, the book of John records a series of I am statements, and one that I want us to take a look at is in John 8, verse 12. In your pew Bibles, it's page 796, if you want to follow along that way. And so Jesus, in this setting, says this, John records it this way. When Jesus spoke again to the people, Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Now that's a pretty big statement, and sometimes I read over scriptures and I really don't get the full impact of the magnitude of what's being said. But it was a lot bigger because of where Jesus was when he said this. He was at the Feast of the Tabernacles. And unless you grew up with a Jewish background, that probably means nothing. It's some words maybe you read in a passage somewhere. And so I looked up what the Feast of the Tabernacles was, and it's this huge party. I mean, huge, not like, you bring some folks over to your house one evening and you have a big party. I mean, huge, because the people from all over Israel came to Jerusalem and spent their time at the temple for this party. And the party wasn't just an evening, it lasted for days. Day after day, and they were celebrating this annual event of the harvest, thanking God for the crops and everything that had happened during the year, but it was also this annual remembrance of how God had been with the people of Israel through years and generations. And when we think of this kind of light symbolism for the Feast of the Tabernacles, we go back to the Old Testament. Exodus 13 talks about this because the people of Israel had been brought through the wilderness or the desert. I don't know why they call it a wilderness, because I've been in southern Israel. It's just desert. There's nothing there. And so for 40 years, the people of Israel had relied on God for everything. Where they were going to go, when they were going to go, preparing them for the next steps. And in Exodus 13, verse 21 and 22, we get a sense of how God guided them. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or by night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. God was always with them, and God used light to guide them when there wasn't light around them, but the light became a bigger symbol, because in the temple, they started keeping a lampstand lit 24/7. The priest, their whole job was to make sure that this lamp was lit, because they wanted to remember that God was their light, and he was always there to lead them. And so we fast forward to the New Testament and the Feast of the Tabernacles. Now, I described this big party. How many people have ever been to like Ford Field, or at least to a football game, and get a sense of how big that is? Well, if you had a party there, that would be a pretty big party, right? Well, the Temple Mount in Israel, where this party was occurring, was like 20 football fields, packed with people, packed with light. The light was so intense that it actually could be seen from miles away, because it almost lit up the whole city of Jerusalem. So when I say big party, I really mean a big party. And so in this place, they had all these lamps filled with oil, and the party was going on for these days, and here's Jesus. And now think of his words a little bit differently, because he basically was coming to say, you all are celebrating how God has been your light. You are remembering it with these lamps that are lit, but I need to tell you something else. I am the light of the world. Now, some people heard these words from Jesus, and they just didn't get it. What do you mean, light of the world? What's that about? But some people got it. In fact, the Pharisees got it so well that they were offended. In fact, they were like, what do you think you're doing? You can't claim that. Light of the world, no way. You're just a man standing before us. How can you make such claims? You're basically speaking against God and all that he's done for us in this setting to say those words. And Jesus said, you know what? I'm just here to glorify God in these words of truth that I speak. The Pharisees knew the implications, and others would know the implications down the road. And as we move in the story, later in the Feast of the Tabernacles, in John chapter 9, there's another I am reference to Jesus as the light. And it's when he sees a blind man. In John chapter 9, starting at verse 5, we have Jesus speaking again. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world. After saying this, Jesus spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. That word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Can you imagine what it would have been like for this man? From birth, blind. And now he could see. Close your eyes with me just for a minute. What do you see? Nothing. Darkness. What if you had to walk around all day like that? What if you had to find a way to work and to take care of your families without being able to see? When we enter a dark room, what's the first thing we do? We reach along the walls and we're feeling for a light switch trying to turn something on. We're grabbing for our phones and trying to turn on the flashlight in the phone and shine it to figure out where we need to go. We're looking for a door, we're looking for a window, something that we can do to let the light in so that we can see what's happening before us. We open our eyes and we see. The light comes in, and as long as there's nothing wrong with our eyes, as this blind man had from birth. And we're so thankful for the light. And most of you have already opened your eyes, and if you haven't, go right ahead and open your eyes. Because it's uncomfortable. We don't want to live in darkness. And so the blind man enjoyed the most miraculous gift from God as Jesus touched him and healed him. And then we see at the end the progression, that it wasn't just about his eyes, because later in that chapter, verse 35, Jesus heard that they had thrown the man out of the temple. And when the man found Jesus, when Jesus found the man, actually, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" It's a term that Jesus used to refer to himself from the Old Testament. "Who is he, sir?" the blind man had asked him. "Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said, "You have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking with you." Then the man said, "Lord, I believe." And he worshiped Jesus. The man realized not just that he had gotten this miracle of his sight, but he realized who Jesus is. And he received this spiritual light and this spiritual insight that he no longer had to live in darkness. Jesus' words, "I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but have the light of life." We start this process by letting the light of Jesus into our lives. In some ways, we do it symbolically with something like communion, where we literally take in symbols of Christ's body and his blood to remember his sacrifice for us. But Jesus said another thing about light. It's in the book of Matthew. Matthew 5:14 to 15. In your pew Bibles, that's page 719. Matthew 5:14 to 15 reads this way. "You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house." Well, what does that mean? We can look at how the blind man was able to see, and he got the light, and we understand he told who had healed him, and it was Jesus. But now there's something more that Jesus is saying. He's not making a declaration about himself. He's making a declaration about everyone else. It's an extension. When we look at that John chapter 9 story of the blind man, if you go to John 9, starting at verse 8, I'm not going to read the whole section because there's about 26 verses, but let me just kind of highlight some key things from that story. I told you how the blind man had seen Jesus, gotten healed, and at the very end, he realized who Jesus was. But in the middle, there's this kind of discovery process with the man. His neighbors and friends came up to him and they were surprised. I mean, this guy had been blind from birth, and now he could see. What happened? And so they asked him, and the blind man, I can just picture his excitement and energy and enthusiasm because he could finally see. And he's like, Jesus, he made some mud and he put it on my eyes and he told me to go wash in this pool and then I could see. And so all this storytelling about Jesus got some attention. And so the Pharisees called the man in and said, what's going on? What happened with you? And so the man, I can imagine over time, he's told this story so many times, he's starting to kind of shortcut and say, hey, you know what? He put mud on my eyes, he washed, and I could see. And the Pharisees were like, wait a minute. What are you trying to say about this man, Jesus, who did this for you? And so the former blind man, he's like, well, he must be a prophet. He must be from God. And so the Pharisees sent for the man's parents and said, okay, this is your son, right? They're like, yes. What's the story with him? And they said, well, he was born blind and he sees now, but we don't know what happened. He's grown. He can speak for himself. And in reality, those parents were probably a little bit afraid that the Pharisees were questioning and didn't like what was going on, and they were going to be thrown out of the temple potentially. And so the Pharisees, not getting any more information out of the parents, went back to the man and said, okay, tell us the story again. Almost like a lawyer in a courtroom asking over and over to see if you can trip somebody up in a story. And so the man, who's told the story multiple times out of joy and declaration of who Jesus is probably getting a little tired with whatever the Pharisees are trying to do. And he says, you know what? I don't know. But one thing I do know, I was blind, and now I see. As the Pharisees continued to grill him and ask him all these questions, he's like, you know what? If this guy was not from God, he couldn't do these things. And the Pharisees wound up throwing him out of the temple. But the man, he had his eyes healed so he could see the light in the world around him. But he also had his spirit healed so that he could see God and realize who Jesus was as God's son. Now, this man was just from happenstance telling everybody about the great thing that had been done for him. And that's what Jesus means when he says, you are the light of the world. We're not supposed to hide the things that happen. We're not supposed to, as they say, put it under a cover, under some kind of hiding so people can't see the light that God has put inside of us. We're actually supposed to raise it up and put it on a stand and make sure that people know. It sounds so simple that way, right? The man was grilled multiple times by friends, by neighbors, by the Pharisees, and it didn't matter who they were or what position of power they had. His story was the same, and what had been done in his life and who Jesus was from what he had learned. It seems like for us, we need to do the same thing. First, we need to realize Jesus is the light of the world. And if we haven't, let him into our lives so that that light then will shine out to those around us. How do we let that light out, though. We cover that light sometimes, don't we? We don't think others will listen of how God's impacted our lives. We don't necessarily want to share because, we might be set apart in what we perceive as a bad way. We don't think we have the right words or the training. But remember this guy, he was just telling what happened to him. Sometimes we let circumstances just weigh us down, and we get so bogged down and consumed by what we see and the troubles around us that we forget about the blessings and sharing those. Sometimes I have to remind myself I kind of have two jobs, and the church job, if you will, is pretty easy. I mean, I'm supposed to talk about God. But when I go to Ford Motor Company, that's not the most God-friendly place on this planet. And so sometimes I look to find ways to just insert God into the conversation, to make that opening, just even in casual conversation about, hey, what'd you do this weekend? Well, I might talk about some fun things I did at church. I might talk about how I've been really blessed by some things that God has been setting up in my life. And sometimes they'll be intrigued by that. And that light of the world that I get to show off in a place that's so dark. I'm doing what Jesus called me to do. And I hope that you use those opportunities as well, whether it be at work, whether it be at home, particularly if you're with your kids, whether it be at the grocery store, whether it be at the bank, or whatever the case might be. You are the light of the world. Jesus called you to that. Don't worry about how to do it right or messing up. Be the light. Show the light. Through your words, through your mindset, through the joyful attitude that you take in approaching things. I'm going to have the worship team come up for the closing song. But this week, as you go through the routines of your life, I want you to pay attention to the symbolic reminder of light. Whether it be when you go into a dark room and turn on that light switch. Whether it be when you turn the lights on in your car as you're driving down the road. Because those are just the simple little reminders that can keep it in our heads. Because maybe some of us need to let Jesus' light into our lives. Maybe we're concerned for someone we know or care about because they need that light in their lives. Or maybe we just need to be open to letting Jesus' light shine in our lives so that others may see. The altars are open, as you heard earlier. You can come pray for yourself, for someone else. But right now, I want to just pray for us all before the song. God, thank you. Thank you that you came into this world to be the light. The light that would help us know you as God. God, for anyone here that hasn't had that experience, I pray that they would open themselves up to let your light in. Let your light into their lives so they can be changed and transformed. And God, for those of us that have the light inside, let us not hide it, let us not cover it, but let us show it. Let us tell it. Let us be open so that those people around us can see you. To see you, God, in a way that draws them in to the light that they want in their lives. And we thank you. In Jesus' name.